Hello, everyone.
My name is Michael. I'm 37, just a regular guy from Ohio, and I work as a director at a charitable foundation. I have a wife, Emily, who's 30 now, and we have a son, Lucas, who just turned 4. 7 years ago, Emily and I got married, and as far as I knew, everything was fine between us. I always thought we were a good match. Emily's smart, caring, and, or so I thought, happy. We both work, but finally, this fall, we managed to set aside time for a family vacation. So we took off to the ocean in Southern California, to Laguna Beach. It was the perfect spot. Ocean, sun, sand. Emily was glowing when we hit the beach. Lucas was building his first sandcastles, shouting with excitement every time the waves washed over his feet. I'm not as big on the beach as they are, but it didn't matter. I was more than willing to sit under an umbrella with a book all day if it made them happy. Everything was great until one day when I got a call from the office. A critical project was at risk of falling apart, and, like usual, they couldn't make a decision without me. I knew I'd have to head back, even if only for a few days. I told Emily, and she didn't mind. After all, we'd already had almost the whole vacation together. There were 5 days left, and she reassured me that she and Lucas would have a great time and that I didn't need to worry. I left with peace of mind, glad they'd still be able to enjoy themselves. But when I got back home after that trip, something had changed between us. Emily felt distant, like something was weighing on her. She always seemed preoccupied, lost in her thoughts. At first, I chalked it up to tiredness or maybe her stress over my job. But the more I noticed, the stronger my feeling became that something else was going on. Months went by. I was almost able to stop worrying about the change in her behavior, but then, one day at work, a package was delivered to me. I hadn't been expecting anything, so I was instantly on edge, wondering who it was from and what was inside. I opened it and just froze, staring at the photos. I instantly recognized our hotel room. Emily was in the pictures. There was no doubt it was her. But her expression, the look in her eyes, everything was different. There was a kind of passion, a lightness and excitement in her that I had never seen when she looked at me. She was naked on the same bed we had shared, only I wasn't there with her in that moment. I sat in my office, staring at these photos, and my heart was pounding. Shock was the first feeling that hit me. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Who took these pictures? And how did they even get to me? I looked through them again and again, as if something might change, but it only got worse. I stood there, looking at these pictures, trying to figure out what was going on. In most of the shots, it was Emily, but not the Emily I knew. This was a side of her that, apparently, I'd never seen. In one photo, she was sitting on the beach, lifting her bikini top a bit, revealing herself. In another, she was posing so you could see her thighs, almost revealing her most private area, with a playful look on her face, a freedom and confidence I'd never seen in her before. They were her pictures, her body, her smile, but somehow, everything felt like it belonged to a stranger. I tried to find any clue, anything that might tell me who took these pictures, but there was nothing. Just her, smiling, uninhibited, a version of her I had never seen in all our years together. These photos could only have been taken in close, trusted company. There was no randomness, no games here. She clearly knew who was behind the camera, and her trust went far beyond just flirting. What did I do wrong? Why was it that my wife had opened up to someone else in ways she never had with me? I kept looking at these photos, and one thought kept pounding in my mind. One that I tried to push away but couldn't. Why wasn't she like this with me? We'd been together for 7 years. We have a child, and here she was. In these pictures, she looked so different. She had an energy, a passion, a sensuality, a freedom that I'd never seen in her around me. She seemed more alive. What did I do wrong? Was I really not capable of giving her that feeling, that passion? For the first time, I let myself ask the question, was she ever truly happy with me? Or had she just been pretending all these years? I mean, I'm not young. I'm no athlete, and our sex life had become, well, predictable. I get that, but I always tried. I always thought it was enough. She'd never complained, not once told me she was missing something. But now, looking at these photos, I couldn't help but imagine how she'd been with this other guy. Whoever he was, he clearly knew how to bring out something in her I'd never seen. He brought out that passion, made her feel relaxed, wanted. I thought about the way she must have looked at him, leaned into him, how her eyes must have lit up when he was near. I couldn't shake the bitter, gnawing thought. What if she felt things with him that she never felt with me? What if her body responded to his touch more than it ever did to mine? Had I ever satisfied her like he must have? These questions tormented me, tore me apart. Thinking about how she might have felt with him was unbearable. Over and over, I asked myself, had she just been pretending this whole time? My mind was in chaos. I had questions, but not even a hint of answers. I grabbed the photos and rushed out of the office, barely remembering if I even said anything to my coworkers. My mind was filled with just one thought. Is this really true? Is this really Emily? When I got home, the house was silent. Emily wasn't back yet, and that gave me a few minutes to pull myself together. I tossed the photos onto the living room table and just stared at them, trying to make sense of any of it. My head told me to wait, calm down, try to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was all a prank, Photoshop, I didn't know. But my gut, and every damn detail on those photos, told me this was no mistake. I heard Emily come in. Her footsteps were light, carefree, as if nothing had happened. At first, she didn't see me. She went straight to the kitchen, did something there, and only then came into the living room. When she saw the photos on the table, her face changed instantly. She froze, staring at them, and right then, I knew this wasn't a mistake. Emily stood there, staring at the photos, her face pale. Her lips quivered, her eyes widened. She looked like she'd turned to stone, and in that moment I realized. I didn't need to ask, didn't need confirmation. Everything was crystal clear. Is that you? My voice cracked, and I barely held back my anger to stop myself from yelling. Emily didn't answer, just looked at me with horror and shame I'd never seen in her before. But damn it, I didn't need her shame. I needed answers. What had he given her that I hadn't? What was so wrong with me? Tell me why him? I finally managed to say, gritting my teeth. Emily looked away, as if the question paralyzed her. There was something strange in her expression, almost like regret, but also a desire to avoid answering. I wasn't about to let her escape. How long? I asked, pressing one question after another, as if trying to grasp something I could hold on to, just something to make sense of it all. She mumbled something, but it didn't matter. In my mind, scenes kept playing, as if my imagination itself was putting together the pieces. I pictured her with him, imagined how she allowed him to do things she'd never done with me. My thoughts spun in circles, each new turn only deepening the pain and rage. I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, somehow, I'd lost her, that maybe I'd never been the one who could truly ignite her. I knew that Emily was somewhere far away, that she didn't hear or understand just how devastating this was. Do you even get it? I'm here. I am. Not him. I've always been here for you. But you? My words hung in the air. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, but it was no use. The words stuck, heavy in my throat, and the weight of them felt unbearable. Why, Emily? I said, my voice coming out unfamiliar and rough. What did he give you? Is he better than me? Emily looked away, swallowing nervously. Silence filled the space between us, and that silence burned more than any words could. She didn't try to justify herself, didn't deny anything I was assuming. I looked at her, feeling a swell of anger and betrayal. I thought I knew her, every gesture, every look. But now, looking at her, I realized I knew nothing. I leaned back into the couch, staring up at the ceiling, and, more to myself than to her, I whispered, "How could you do this? All these years. Why couldn't you just tell me if something was missing, if something was wrong? I would have understood." I pictured her with someone else, maybe a young, carefree guy, someone unburdened by all the routine of life. I saw her, filled with a kind of passion I'd apparently never sparked. To her, I'd been ordinary, predictable, reliable. She needed someone who could bring something new, someone bold and reckless. The thrill of the forbidden must have pulled her in, drawn her into a game where I was just a shadow in her life. And that hurt the most. I'd become a prisoner of my own care and reliability, the one who was always there but, clearly, not enough for her. Jealousy choked me, burned from the inside, tearing me apart, imagining that maybe, to her, this had just been some temporary thrill was unbearable. Emily took a heavy breath, looking off to the side, and said quietly, "Michael, it was a mistake. I don't know how it happened. It was just a moment of weakness." Her words felt hollow, like an echo, distant and detached. It was as if she was repeating some rehearsed line that meant nothing. Weakness. My voice wavered. You call this weakness? You betrayed us. Me, our family, everything we had. She looked away, tears glistening in her eyes. But it wasn't what I had been waiting for. In her eyes, I didn't see any regret, not even an attempt to explain, to salvage something. It was just formality. It was just flirting, nothing serious, she said softly, as if trying to convince herself. Flirting? You call this flirting? Emily, these photos don't show flirting. They show a woman who clearly wanted more. The room filled with a suffocating silence, heavy and oppressive, as if the weight of it was crushing us both. We both stood there, swallowed up in the tension, feeling like strangers in what was supposed to be our own home. Words had lost their meaning. Everything I knew seemed to be collapsing like a house of cards. Finally, I lifted my hand and pointed at the photos on the table. You call this flirting? Are you serious? Emily, did you ever look at me like that? Were you ever like that with me? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. This wasn't just jealousy or anger. It was utter disappointment, knowing that she couldn't give me even a fraction of what she had so willingly given to someone else. She was silent, swallowing as if her words were caught in her throat, and I could see the embarrassment on her face. Her cheeks flushed red as she nervously tugged at the edge of her sweater, avoiding my gaze. She tried to say something, but all that came out was, "Michael, I'm sorry. It's not you, you know? It's something else." Her answer hit me even harder. Not you. As if the issue wasn't with our relationship, not something I had or hadn't done, but simply that she had wanted something new, something different. In that moment, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. What do you mean, not you? I said, barely holding back the tremor in my voice. You're not even trying to explain yourself, not trying to come up with an excuse. You're just admitting that you needed someone else. So now how am I supposed to look at us? At you? At our relationship? At everything we built? She tried to say something else, but I wasn't listening anymore. Those photos and her words had destroyed everything. I grabbed my car keys and headed to the door without looking back. Michael, wait, please. Her voice was trembling, but I didn't turn around. I shut the door behind me, her words fading, becoming quieter and quieter. I walked outside, nearly choking on anger and despair, with one thought pounding in my head. How could she? I came to on the back seat of my car, feeling a dull ache in my head and my mouth dry as sandpaper. The cool morning air seeped into the car, a reminder that I hadn't even bothered to go home. A half-empty bottle of whiskey lay at my feet, and next to me on the seat were the photos, those photos of her. Naked, laughing, free. The shadow of last night crashed back down on me, bringing the full weight of what had happened into sharp focus. I sat there, unmoving, not knowing what to do next. My thoughts circled endlessly around the same question. How could I have been so wrong about the person I loved? How could I have thought I knew her? Her body, her smile, her laughter. All of it felt alien, distant, no longer mine. I picked up the photos, crumpled them, but I couldn't throw them away. They stayed in my hand, as if I couldn't fully accept this betrayal. Looking at my watch, I realized I was already late for work, and driving there in this state would be crazy. I crossed the street and got on the nearest bus, clutching the photos and whatever shreds of sanity I had left, as if they could somehow save me from this reality. The whole ride to the office, I tried not to think, not to remember, but my mind, almost out of spite, kept replaying images of her, this other Emily, the one I apparently never knew. When I got to the office, my coworkers at the meeting shot me quick, worried glances, but no one dared ask anything. Physically, I was there, but I couldn't focus on a single word. not one document in front of me. In my head, I kept hearing Emily's voice. It was just a moment of weakness. The echo of her words wouldn't let me rest. It felt like every person around me was staring, knowing exactly what had happened, even though I hadn't said a word. The hours dragged by painfully slowly, and every time I tried to focus on my work, those photos flashed in my mind. I saw her, free, exposed, posing trustingly for someone else. By lunchtime, I knew there was no way I could work today. Every email, every word on the screen blurred before my eyes. My head was buzzing with anger and exhaustion, and a solid realization grew inside me. I could no longer live under the same roof as her. Everything in our home felt fake now, broken down to its core. She hadn't just taken my trust. She'd taken everything I had built for us. Without saying a word to anyone, I packed my things, went down to the lobby, hailed a cab, and went home. The clock showed it was around 2, and I knew Emily would still be at work, with Lucas getting picked up from preschool soon. I had time to do what I should have done yesterday. Pack her things and send them somewhere she could face the consequences on her own. I stood in our bedroom, surrounded by Emily's things, and felt the anger build in me again. Now I was just throwing her clothes as if they belonged to a stranger I needed to clear out of the house. I tossed her dresses, blouses, shoes, not caring how they folded. I no longer felt any attachment to these things, and each one felt like a symbol of her betrayal. It had all become trash to me, worthless reminders of someone I no longer knew. When the suitcase was full, I threw her passport on top. She could decide where to go. Last, I took off my wedding ring and, looking at it, felt memories pierce me all over again. The ring we exchanged on the day we vowed to always be there for each other. A promise that turned out to be empty. I placed the ring on top, with her passport, a symbolic gesture. One last thing to leave her past in the past. Lucas and I were sitting in the kitchen when I heard the front door close. Emily walked in with her usual light step, but this time I didn't get up to meet her. I just stayed seated next to our son, watching as she came into the room, looking around in confusion. Her face registered surprise. "Mom," I said to Lucas in a calm, almost gentle tone, "Mom's going on a business trip. Did you know?" I packed her suitcase. "It's upstairs." I looked directly at Emily, and there was an expression on my face that made her visibly uneasy. Emily froze, looking from me to Lucas, completely thrown off. I noticed her face turn pale as she realized this wasn't just some misunderstanding. "Michael, what are you talking about?" Her voice shook, but she tried to keep her cool, glancing around, as if searching for a way out of the situation. I stood up, placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, and nodded toward the stairs. "Your suitcase is upstairs, Emily. You're in a hurry to catch your flight, so go ahead and grab it. I've already called you a taxi. It'll be here in a few minutes." Emily looked at me, bewildered, her lips trembling, and she seemed at a complete loss for words. She took a step back, as if trying to retreat, but I stayed calm and firm, motioning for her to go upstairs. I gave Lucas a gentle smile and continued. "Mommy's going on a business trip, buddy. She'll be back when she's finished with her work," I said, not bothering to hide the coldness in my voice, aimed solely at Emily. With each second, her confusion became more obvious, but I pushed her toward the stairs, pointing her up to where her suitcase waited, filled with her belongings, her passport, and the wedding ring, symbols of her betrayal. Emily stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking at me with complete bewilderment and fear in her eyes. She wanted to say something, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. I simply gestured to the stairs, making it clear there would be no conversation, no explanations needed. She took a shaky breath and reluctantly started up, her steps slow and uncertain, as if with each step she realized she was moving closer to the end of everything we had. Lucas sat next to me, unaware of the whole drama unfolding around him. For him, it was an ordinary, peaceful moment. I had done everything to make sure he never knew what was really happening. But now this semblance of normalcy felt even more painful. I pulled him close, feeling his little fingers grip my hand, and that simple gesture gave me the strength to stay calm, despite everything boiling inside me. A few minutes later, Emily came downstairs, holding her suitcase with both hands. It seemed to me she wasn't gripping it because of its weight, but because it had now become a burden too heavy for her to bear. Her face showed despair. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she didn't say a word. I just watched her, observing as her world, built on lies, crumbled before my eyes. "The taxi is already waiting outside," I said, not taking my eyes off her. My voice was cold and clear. She turned, approached Lucas, and with difficulty, managed a smile as she gently brushed her hand over his hair. "Mommy will be back soon, okay? Sweetheart?" she said, but her voice was shaky, and it was obvious she was struggling to hold back her tears. Lucas hugged her goodbye, unaware that soon might mean something completely different. I walked over to the door, opened it, and turning to her, said, "It's time." Emily paused at the doorway, her hands still clutching the suitcase handle, and for a moment, I saw a desperate attempt in her eyes to explain, to say something. It seemed the words she was about to speak were her last chance. "Michael," her voice was weak and trembling, but she continued, "You don't understand. I was trying to protect you and Lucas. There are things you don't know, something terrible. Someone is trying to destroy our life. It's not what it seems." I tensed, forcing myself not to say anything harsh, not to get drawn in by this strange, pitiful tone she'd suddenly chosen. Her words sank into the bitter sense of betrayal that was eating away at me from the inside. All these justifications, her pleas, they were meaningless. I didn't want to listen. I couldn't listen. I just stepped forward and pointed silently toward the taxi waiting at the gate. She fell silent, her gaze darting between me and Lucas, as though searching for any hint of understanding, but she found none. I could see her face contort with pain, but I couldn't keep the door open any longer. Not for her. "Enough, Emily," I said coldly, and without waiting for an answer, I closed the door right in front of her face, not allowing myself to look back. Emily left in the taxi, and I was alone in an empty house, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I went to the kitchen and sat down at the table, staring into nothingness, but flashes of images and fragments of our recent conversations ran through my mind. I remembered how, right after she came back from that trip, she avoided my questions. She was unusually distant, her answers shallow, as if she were afraid to delve too deeply into her own memories. A week after her return from the vacation, I gathered the courage to ask her directly what had happened. "Emily, what's wrong?" I asked when she came home, looking completely drained. Emily hesitated, her gaze drifting to the floor, as though searching for something to focus on so she wouldn't have to look me in the eye. Finally, summoning her resolve, she told me what had happened on the beach. How she had fallen asleep, how she'd suddenly lost sight of Lucas, and how some young man had rushed in to save him, pulling him out of the water at the cost of his own life. "I don't know how to tell you. It was so hard for me to realize that a man had died because of me, and my son was the one who survived." Her words trembled, just like her voice. I listened without interrupting, but in my mind, gaps started to form. There were too many things left unsaid, too many details that didn't add up. For a while, I tried to convince myself I was overthinking, but each day, going back to that conversation, I sensed that something had been left hidden. A strange feeling of unease wouldn't let go. Sitting there now, with Emily gone, I felt like I was finally getting close to the truth. I remembered her thin, careful voice, her slow responses, and the shadow in her eyes when she mentioned that young man without ever saying his name. The beach incident was more than just a tragic accident for her. Her reaction wasn't the kind of sorrow you feel for a stranger's tragedy. It was a mix of fear and guilt. I got up and went to Lucas's room, where he lay sleeping peacefully. Looking at my son, I felt how each day, that incident was driving a wedge further between us. Looking at him, I understood. Between Emily and me, there was something she wasn't ready to reveal. That night, I couldn't sleep, but I began to understand that Emily's withdrawal wasn't accidental. More than a month passed since I found out about Emily's betrayal. I withdrew into myself, trying to keep up appearances for Lucas, but every call from her, every attempt to speak to me, only triggered anger. Emily had moved in with her mother, and for a while, a cold truce settled between us. She kept trying to repair our marriage, but I I still didn't know what to do. Betrayal can be forgiven if there's honesty, openness, if the person at least tries to explain. But Emily, she would rather keep lying until the end. One evening, when I came home from work, the mailman handed me an envelope. There was no name on it, and at first, I thought it was just junk mail. But as soon as I opened it, I knew I was wrong. Inside was a letter from Alex's mother. I went inside, tossed my bag on the table, and sat down, reading and rereading her words carefully. Her name was Susan, and she wrote that she had struggled for a long time to find peace. She couldn't understand why her son, whom she knew as a kind and honest person, would be so drawn to a married woman that he'd dedicate his last days to her. Only recently had she gathered the courage to develop an old film reel Alex had on him when he died. The photos, taken on the beach, revealed to her all the hidden sides of the story. Susan wanted to meet Emily and our son, to see the boy her son had given his life for. Her words hit me like a blow, breaking down my own justifications. All this time, I tried to distance myself from the truth, convinced myself that Emily had found a random fling on vacation. But now I knew it had been a connection, however brief, one that had cost a life. "I need to meet with you, Michael," Susan wrote. "I feel this is the only way I can find peace. I want to see the boy my son gave everything for." I put the letter down and closed my eyes. Memories flooded back from those days when I tried over and over to get Emily to talk, when I'd asked her to come clean, trying to understand why she was so determined to protect her secret. I had given her a chance, hoping she'd show some shred of honesty for us, for our son. But Emily had chosen to keep lying. The next day, I called her, and she agreed to come, thinking we would finally have the conversation she'd been waiting for. But when she walked into the house and saw the letter on the table, her expression changed. She knew that I knew. "This letter, it's from Alex's mother," I said coldly, looking directly at her. "She wants to see Lucas. She deserves at least that." Emily turned pale, looking away. "Michael, I can't meet her. I feel too guilty toward that woman." "I don't think you understand your guilt at all, Emily," I replied. "Do you know how many times I asked you, how many chances I gave you to just be honest? But you chose to lie. And now this woman, the mother of that boy, is the only one who deserves the truth." Emily sat across from me, her hands trembling, her gaze darting around the room, as if looking for an escape. She nervously twisted the letter in her hands, and I realized that her fear wasn't of meeting Alex's mother, or even the tragedy she'd buried inside. It was that someone could uncover her truth. All this time, she'd feared one thing, that someone would expose her and her story. Now I saw it clearly. She felt no remorse for what had happened. It was something else that tormented her. She feared the consequences, that maybe someone had seen her with Alex, or that something she'd missed would expose her. My head pulsed with questions that had haunted me since I'd learned the truth. I looked at her closely, and the question that had tormented me most escaped my lips. "Where was Lucas, Emily? Where was our son while you were with him?" For a moment, she froze, then looked away. The question had caught her off guard, and her reaction only fueled my suspicions. "Did you ever think that he could have seen you? That he might have watched the whole thing? Did you consider that you were putting him in danger while you were caught up with someone else?" Emily was silent, her hands clenched. Her fear was almost palpable, and I could see that this wasn't remorse but the fear that her secret might get out. She was more concerned with herself, with her lie, than with how it might affect our son or us. I looked at her again and, almost whispering, said, "You didn't just betray me, Emily. You betrayed our family, our home, and the trust one had in you all these years. And now, with everything out in the open, all you care about is that someone might find out, that someone might see. Susan deserves to meet the person her son died for. She deserves that far more than you deserve forgiveness." Emily finally spoke, but her excuses sounded empty and pathetic. All she could talk about was how much she feared being exposed. She said she couldn't face Susan because she was too scared. With that, I walked out of the room, understanding that the conversation was over. A few days passed after I sent Susan the letter. I hadn't told Emily that I decided to meet Alex's mother. For her, it was just another reminder of a possible exposure, but for me, it had become something more. It was painful to realize that all this time, she had cared only about her own image, not about the fact that she betrayed me and endangered our family. Soon, a reply arrived. Susan suggested meeting at a small cafe on the edge of town. Her letter was restrained, but I could tell it hid pain and that it hadn't been easy for her. I arrived at the cafe early. I ordered a coffee but didn't touch it. When Susan walked in, I recognized her instantly. Her eyes were filled with exhaustion, and when she sat across from me, silence fell between us. It felt like she was studying every line of my face, trying to see the same pain in me that she felt. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she finally said. I nodded, unable to find the words. "You know," she continued, "I thought that with time, the pain would fade. But then I saw those photos, and I realized my son had his reasons, an attachment to your wife. I thought there was something more between them, but I was wrong." Her voice trembled, and this unexpected confession made me tense. I understood that she had seen a side of my wife in those photos I had never known. "You probably want to understand why he did what he did?" I asked, not knowing the answer myself. Susan looked at me, and a shadow of bitterness and confusion crossed her eyes. "No, Michael," she replied quietly. "I already understand." She played with him. He saved her son, risking his life, and Susan took a deep breath. She forgot him as soon as she could leave the beach. This revelation stunned me. I tried to convince myself that Emily had been a victim of chance, a fleeting infatuation. But the distance and fear I'd seen in her over the past few months turned out to be a selfish attempt to bury everything and go on as if nothing had happened. "I think you deserve the truth, Susan," I finally said, deciding it was time to end it. She's still hiding from it, afraid that someone might uncover her secret, instead of realizing that with her actions, she destroyed our marriage and the family we built. Susan nodded, her eyes lighting up with a cold resolve. "I wanted to meet your son to feel like my boy hadn't died in vain. But now I see he deserves more than this sham." I looked at her in silence, knowing this conversation had reached its final point. I said goodbye to Susan, feeling that there was nothing left for me to hide. Returning home, I decided it was time to draw the line in my own marriage. I called Emily and told her we needed to meet. She had been staying with her mother for weeks now, ever since her secrets began unraveling. And although she tried to keep up a pretense of normalcy for Lucas's sake, I could see that her main goal was to protect herself. She still believed that she could somehow return to the life she'd known, as if all this could be swept under the rug, like nothing had really happened. When she walked into the cafe, I could see she had prepared herself for this conversation, built up her walls. But this time, I wasn't looking for excuses, wasn't going to ask questions, or try to find anything human left in her. She sat down across from me and tried to smile, but I cut her off immediately. "Emily," I began slowly, "I just got back from meeting Alex's mother." Her eyes widened, and I saw her hands start to tremble. She paled, as if realizing everything was now exposed. Silence stretched between us until, finally, she spoke in a whisper, as if the words were pulled out against her will. "You don't understand, Michael. I didn't want him dead," her voice broke. No, I did. All I could think about was getting rid of him. He was a threat, don't you see? He could ruin everything. If he'd lived, you would have found out everything." Her words hung in the air like the blade of a knife. I felt my blood freeze in my veins. All this time, I'd been trying to understand, to forgive, even to convince myself that she just had a moment of weakness. But what she was admitting now revealed a monstrous truth. She had deliberately wanted him dead. She had stood calmly on the shore as he, exhausted, struggled with the waves for our son. "You wanted his death?" I repeated in a barely audible voice, feeling a chill spread through my chest. "You stood there watching as he went under, just to keep your lie alive?" She could no longer look at me, covering her face with her hands, and I sat there, stunned, realizing that the person before me was a stranger. Everything I knew, everything I loved and believed in, turned out to be a lie. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had become someone I couldn't have imagined even in my worst nightmares. You're a monster, Emily," I said, barely restraining my anger. How could I live with you all these years? She lifted her head, tears in her eyes, but there was no remorse, only the fear of losing what she tried to hold on to at any cost. I realized that for my son's sake, I had to break this vicious cycle to shield him from such an influence. Listen to me, I said, gathering all my self-control. You are leaving this family. I'm prepared to make a deal with you. You leave without a scandal, without a fight. I get full custody of Lucas, and you never return to his life. Emily froze, realizing that she was losing everything. I saw that she clung to the hope of avoiding the consequences, hoping this was just another hard patch she could get through. But now she finally understood there was no escaping reality. Full custody, I repeated coldly. You won't receive any support payments. No alimony. You will never see Lucas again. I'm offering this as your final deal. She opened her mouth, as if to protest, but I raised my hand to stop her. I was firm, resolute, and for the first time in all of this, I saw that she understood I'd already made my decision. Michael, please, her voice shook, filled not with fear but with desperation. I understand that I made a mistake, but it was just one incident. I can still be a mother to Lucas. Are you really going to take even that away from me? You've already taken that from yourself, Emily, I replied, feeling a coldness settle over me. You put his life at risk and destroyed everything we'd built. How can you be his mother when you stood by calmly, watching the man who saved our son die, just to protect yourself? Emily reached for my hand, her voice turning pleading. Michael, you can't take everything from me. I'll do whatever you ask. Just don't take Lucas away from me. I stepped back, careful not to let her manipulation get to me. I knew she'd do anything to serve her own interests. But that didn't matter to me now. This isn't a request, Emily, I said. I'm not giving anything back to you. You're leaving our lives, leaving Lucas, and we're never revisiting this conversation. You won't see your son. You won't be a part of his life. We both know it's better this way. Emily slowly lowered her head, realizing her game was over. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they meant nothing. She was a broken woman who had finally understood that all her attempts to maintain the image of a perfect mother had collapsed. Sign the documents, Emily, I added. I don't want this to go to court. Just sign, and you'll keep a shred of dignity. Otherwise, I'll tell everyone the truth about what you did. Her shoulders slumped, and I watched as the last drop of hope faded. She nodded slowly, accepting her defeat. The next day, Emily signed the documents, marking the final step in ending the life I'd built, trusting and loving her. I swore to myself that I'd never let her destroy what was left of us, Lucas and me. What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.
Bye bye.